We have these enormous political warfare and psychological warfare campaigns happening in the United States. We have nobody that's responsible for responding to them.
Few people understand the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare methods as well as Robert Spalding. He's a retired Air Force Brigadier General and B-2 stealth bomber pilot, former Senior Director of Strategy at the National Security Council, and author of War Without Rules.
To depend on an enemy to supply things that are absolutely critical for your national security. This is bad strategy. It's bad policy on the part of the United States to leave ourselves open to blackmail.
He's also the CEO of Semper, a company actively hardening America's network security.
Maui fire, LA fire, Hurricane Helene, 9/11. All of these crises that take down communications, things stop working because they're not built to survive an attack. They're not even built to survive a natural disaster.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Robert Spalding, so good to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Great to be back.
So we've interviewed multiple times over the last 6 years. I still remember the first time we were actually talking about rare earth and trade. In this case, it was this new trade agreement that the Trump administration, Trump 45, had made with communist China. Tell me what is happening with the Trump approach to trade, and how does that connect with, all sorts of different policies, including communist China?
Well, what's interesting about interviewing back then was I think we were still in the first Trump administration, and it was still pre-COVID. So you can't just look at what the president is doing. You have to look at the evolution of the president through COVID, through the loss of the election in 2020, how his thinking has evolved, how his recognition of Washington, D.C. has evolved, because I think all of that contributes to the way he's acting today. I think he recognized a lot of things that are going on in our society that, really were highlighted by COVID. But, there's political warfare, there's psychological warfare going on with a communist party that in China that wants to see the downfall of the United States and uses political warfare to create hyper-partisanship within the United States. And then you have, in essence, the president learning his lesson the first time. I think what he learned was not only is the world a bad place, Washington, D.C. is a bad place. And more importantly, he has to be bold. He has to be aggressive. He has to make decisions. And I think the other thing is he surrounded himself this time with people that, rather than trying to control the president, like a lot of the people that were around him, we need to control him. We need to constrain him. They're actually allowing him to do the things that he does best, which is, in essence, be the chief negotiator, the chief foreign policy strategist for the United States, is the chief national security strategist for the United States. He's doing those things, and he's being very successful at it in ways that are throwing off the rest of the world. And I think the reason is that he had that opportunity to go and see for himself how the world is working against us, how DC and in many respects New York are working with the world to undermine the United States. And how do I begin to disassemble all this? I think, it's very scary for the establishment because they have been very comfortable in the way things have been working, but I think he's being very successful in slowly dismantling. And the biggest thing, is really trade.
So what is happening with this Trump trade policy, and how much is it focused on the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, I think the truth is it's focused on what is the right policy for the United States, irregardless of who the trade partner is. And I think that's the piece that I believe that people are shocked about. The biggest problem people have is with, we shouldn't punish our allies like the Europeans. And there's no recognition of how trade policy developed. What was the rationale for why we went the free trade route. So it's almost like free trade is a indisputable global good, and therefore it's an indisputable national good, and therefore anything that strays away from free trade is bad. It's gone from doctrine to dogma. After the end of the Cold War, there was never a look at, okay, do these things that we did post World War II, do they continue to make sense in a national sense for the United States, from a national security perspective, or even from an economic perspective? And even like the Fed economists, these are very smart people that spend a long time in their university programs creating an economic model. They all have their own economic model that their PhD was based on. But yet there's this one universal, absolute truth that they all agree with, which is tariffs are bad. And I think the president, not being a, Ivy League trained economist with a PhD in a model, is just taking his, kind of Brooklyn, New Jersey upbringing and saying everything that we do is transactional. And actually, when you go around the world and you meet with people that aren't Americans, there's this understanding and belief that everything's transactional and you do everything that's in your own best interest. And I think that works from a personal level, but it also works from a national level. And so the bottom line is, I think we strayed into this thing that was absolutely dogma, that free trade is always an absolute good, and we stopped looking at the impacts that it had, both from a national security perspective in the United States, rare earth metals, perfect example, and from a prosperity advantage to the American people. So one of the big things that I think the Chinese did so well is attack the Gini coefficient in China. Like they attack this idea of wealth disparity, like super poor and the super rich. Is there economic opportunity? Like I've been on factory floors, factories that have shut down because of widespread competition from China, and there's been no response from the federal government in protecting these people. And that allowed China to say, oh, look what we're doing with the Chinese people. We're giving them jobs. Now, they don't care about freedom, but that's okay because we're giving them jobs. And I think this is a central problem of the 21st century for Western liberal democracy is, what are the kind of the things that the founding fathers were looking for? It wasn't just freedom. It was also economic opportunity, the ability to pursue your interests. And they knew at the time, like they understood quite clearly that the federal government had a role to play in protecting industry in the United States. That if they didn't do that, some business owner is not going to be able to do that. And they're not going to be able to do that collectively because they're all going to be competing with each other. So if there wasn't some role of the federal government in protecting them, then it would be lost. And Alexander Hamilton, perfect example. We have to have tariffs for national security. We have to have tariffs to protect our industry. And I think DC just completely got out of that. And then I think this idea that free trade is a universal good was the problem.
I'm going to touch on a bunch of things that you talked about. One is the Gini coefficient, that of course it's a measure of how wealth is concentrated kind of at the top or spread out. And so that's actually something that Secretary Scott Bessent has been talking about, that's actually been shifting in America. So maybe we can touch on that. But this was, and just as a commentary, I'm remembering to be rich is glorious. This was Deng Xiaoping's motto, right? How the party, Chinese Communist Party, is going to maintain power. And that was the deal. Don't touch politics and we'll let you basically increase your economic opportunity and your wealth. Just don't touch politics or you'll get destroyed. I mean, that was kind of the deal, right? But then that's also shifted, and that's interesting too, because as what we're seeing in communist China is that Gini coefficient is kind of rapidly shifting in the opposite direction again, which is really interesting. So anyway, you touched on a bunch of things here, and finally the rare earths piece. But let's take your pick. What would you like to jump in on here?
Well, I think rare earths, the funny thing is I remember Hu Jintao going to Africa, making all these deals for natural resources, like cobalt, like, lithium, like, all of these different things that are being used for things like EV batteries, and thinking, okay, this is not really good. And then, recently we had the Taiwan president, they were planning to transit through New York on the way to, I think, South America on a trip. And the president said no. Why did the president say no? The president said no because the Chinese said no because of rare earth magnets that we need to produce F-35s. This is bad strategy. It's bad policy on the part of the United States to leave ourselves open to blackmail, and it finds its way now directly in the things that we can do. The other thing is, we reversed the NVIDIA chips going, we basically banned NVIDIA chips from going to China. Now we turned them back on. Why do we turn them back on? Because the Chinese said, hey, we're going to cut off rare earth magnets. So this is a direct attack on our sovereignty. It's not using any weapons. It's not using Mattis's his refrain of it's all about lethality. Actually, no, it's not all about lethality. National security is comprehensive, and it starts with your industrial security. It starts with not having to depend on in many ways, an enemy to supply things that are absolutely critical for your national security.
We interviewed about 6 years ago in 2019 for the first time, and we were actually talking about rare earths. I went and looked. I was kind of curious what we were talking about back then, but we were talking about rare earths specifically. And you were, at the time, you advised the Chinese not to use that leverage point that you were just describing. By the way, do you know as a fact that these are the reasons that, or is this your kind of interpretation of what happened?
Not as a fact, but you can see, as soon as they met, all of a sudden the flow of rare earth magnets started to flow to the United States. So I think,
and it's these things. I mean, just for the benefit of the audience, these things are in everything.
Everything, right? Yeah, absolutely, and they're certainly in everything that we do from a weapons perspective. I think what I learned in my time in China was to not try to do what an intelligence analyst does, and that is look for the smoking gun. Like, where is the Chinese Communist Party's order that this isn't going to happen? Because, quite frankly, they have a lot of levers that they can pull to make sure that rare earth magnets don't flow. It doesn't have to be an obvious thing that you can see. What you have to look at is, what are their interests and what is happening in the world, and you can see a tie. So, no, do I know that Xi Jinping said we will not ship any rare earth magnets to the United States until they do these things? Wouldn't it be nice if Xi Jinping would tweet those things, right? Because then we'd know. We have the opposite situation here. The president is like very clear, very transparent. If he wants something, he basically puts it out on X. And but the Chinese Communist Party doesn't do that, and they will never do that. They have some of the most impeccable security policies I think that's ever been devised. You can't take a cell phone into a Communist Party meeting. They don't do that. What we can see is, okay, what is the outcome that's happening? Now we've reversed the NVIDIA thing. Rare earth magnets are flowing. I don't have some crystal ball where I can actually see what Xi Jinping is doing, but I can tell, I know what their interests are, I know what they want, and I can see what's happening in the world, and I can, you know, put two and two together, and I would hope that other people could do that too.
Well, so this is, I think, quite important, what you're saying. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we made in the West, in a lot of ways, is assume good faith from the Chinese Communist Party when we have many decades of evidence that bad faith is the norm. In fact, it's hard to find examples of good faith when you look at it in retrospect, right? So why is it that we assume good faith? Why is it that we just don't assume bad faith unless we have robust evidence to the contrary?
Well, what's the saying? I can't remember who said it, but countries don't have friends, they have interests. And I think good faith or bad faith really, I think in some respects you could say is irrelevant. What is the interest of the United States, and how do we pursue those interests? And in the case of the United States, you know, we know we need rare earth magnets. We know that the Chinese have basically cornered the market on rare earth magnets, and that's basically means that at any time, and we should have known this, you know, 10 years ago. Some people did, like that's why I always said it, this is a problem for us. At any time, they could say, okay, this is going to be the thing that I use to get the United States to do what I want when I want them to do it.
But the reason I mention the bad faith is there's people out there where you share some sort of moral commonality. There's a trust that's been developed over time. You have certain expectations of a person. That's a reasonable thing to factor into your decision making. What I'm saying is that we've factored in a belief that there might be good faith in a trade deal, for example, right? When there's never been any evidence there's ever been good faith in a trade deal, right? Like, makes me even wonder why we make trade deals.
Well, I mean,
right?
but my point is that sometimes you get drawn into this debate on whether or not there is good faith or bad faith, and I'm just saying, the problem is we get into these moral debates, and then then we don't make any headway on what we actually must do from a policy perspective, because people have a problem with that. Like here in DC, people have a problem saying the Chinese Communist Party is bad. Some people would say I wear a tinfoil hat. I absolutely loathe the Chinese Communist Party and think they absolutely seek the destruction of the United States. Okay, this is tinfoil hat wearing Rob to, you know, a lot of people here in DC. Then okay, don't think about those. Just think, okay, what is the topic of rare earth magnets? Is it vital to the national security of the United States? Yes. Is it in our best interest that we don't rely on, you know, one nation, whether or not you agree that they're bad or good? I think a reasonable person could say, yeah, that's probably a bad policy. Okay, then what do we do to solve it? Then trade policy, tariff policy, industrial policy, the Defense Production Act, Title III, all of these tools that we have in the arsenal that we put into law for national security reasons, they're there and they should be used. Where we have people here, and I would say a lot of economists of the Fed would say, no, we don't want to do industrial policy, kind of like we don't want to have tariffs, we don't want to do industrial policy because we want to let the market work. Well, the market doesn't care about the national security of the United States. Oftentimes, the market only cares about one thing, and that's profit. And if the profit is served because the Chinese have skewed the market in order to capture the supply of rare earth magnets, that's what's going to happen.
I want to kind of look at the different methods of warfare that the Chinese Communist Party is using against the US and the West more broadly right now. This has been a central theme of our discussions over the last 6 years. What do you see in play right now the most? What are the most obvious routes, other than, of course, this, you know, you could call it ore warfare or something like that, or rare earths warfare?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that is an element of it, but in reality, let's go back to the beginnings of the Communist Party. The Soviet Union had a method to their madness when it came to destroying societies from within so that this communist element could arise. And that's exactly what happened in China. You know, the Nationalist Party had better trained forces. They were supported by the United States, and you know, in the Chinese Communist Party basically turned the population against the Nationalist Party. You know, in some respects for a lot of good reasons. Well, if you look in Taiwan, you see the same elements of that. It is how do you mobilize the people against their own government? And I think the thing that's different, the thing that's new, is the iPhone, right? The iPhone pops up in 2007, and even though these two PLA lieutenant colonels write about unrestricted warfare in 1997, you know, it really needed the iPhone and 4G networks to come together to create the beginnings of the mobile economy. This is where Apple came from. This is where the FANGs came from. Facebook, you know, all of these social media platforms, these very large tech companies, they are all centered around this ability to take data about you, from you, and then coalesce it back into things that are attractive to you, but then also begin to change your perceptions, your behaviors, your attitudes, right? Leading to TikTok. But then beyond TikTok, it's, you know, now incorporating AI. So now we're getting to this world that not only the technology is there, but the economic consolidation when it comes to media platforms has occurred as well. And so while the Chinese Communist Party deliberately built these systems in China, they kind of organically formed in the same manner in the West. So the Chinese Communist Party uses TikTok to basically propagandize the US population, but TikTok is also used in American politics, so now there's this reticence to get rid of it, right, within the political system. It is endemic to who we are as a people now, these platforms. And these platforms, also the same platforms that our enemies are using to destroy support for you know, our constitutional republic. That's warfare, right? That is, you know, if you go back to kind of, again, my thing about lethality, if you look at, there's a good, I write about in my book, Francois Julien wrote this treatise, he called it the Treatise on Efficacy, talked about it before, and he does strategy between the West and the East, and he says the West, you know, picks a goal and then musters her resources and goes for it. In the East, in China, it's all about where are the trends going, how do I align myself with those trends so I can be carried away by them. This is what the Chinese Communist Party did, and it's how they are using the trends. You know, I started with the iPhone, 4G networks, now 5G networks, all the tech companies, right, that are taking all of this data, the consolidation of media. Now we have 5 major corporations that control all of the legacy media in the United States for the most part. And by the way, the legacy media, you know, basically takes, you know, other media that's not legacy, you know, mainstream media, and says, okay, they're tinfoil hat wearing people, like, you know, like Epoch Times, the same thing, right? They try to diminish the influence of these other media platforms because they want to be the one that provides the messages. And then there's alignment of the messages from them and the tech companies and the Chinese Communist Party, right? There's an agreement that what do we don't want decoupling. Economic decoupling is bad. Economic coupling is how the Chinese Communist Party have the ability to influence our political process, our media, through, you know, Hollywood, through all of these messaging, and enables them to slowly, and it doesn't happen overnight. And I think this is the reason people don't recognize it, is because it's a slow process of changing your attitudes about democracy, about freedom. I still remember the perfect example of this is Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know, so here's a guy that immigrated to the United States, had all the opportunity in the world, and then in the height of COVID, he's saying, He's looking in the camera and says, "Screw your freedom."
Screw your freedom.
Like, take that back to when he gets to Muscle Beach, and he's able to become this, bodybuilder movie star. And would that Arnold Schwarzenegger have felt that way? No. You can go back to interviews he's had. He's like so thankful that he came to the United States and had the ability to achieve his dreams. But in that moment, freedom to him was the worst thing in the world. And you think about it, what does the Chinese Communist Party want you to believe? Freedom is bad. Like, universally, Chinese people believe this because that's what they're taught. But the power of warfare, and it's cognitive warfare, the power in warfare in this day and age is the ability to get somebody who more or less, thinks they live in a free system to say, I don't like living in a free system. I actually like that one better. That is magic.